In 1626, one of the most famous real estate deals in human history supposedly happened. The Dutch bought Manhattan Island for just $24. Yes, the land that would eventually become New York City. The financial capital of the world was allegedly traded for a handful of beads and cheap goods. For centuries, people repeated this story like a joke. But here's the uncomfortable truth. What if Manhattan was never truly sold at all? What if the people living there didn't even believe land could be owned? And what if the most famous purchase in American history was actually the beginning of something far darker? Tonight, we uncovered the real story behind the purchase of Manhattan, long before skyscrapers pierced the clouds, before Wall Street, before Times Square, before America even existed. Manhattan belonged to the Lenape people. The Lenape had lived across the region for generations. They hunted, fished, traded, and built communities along the rivers. To them, land was not a product. You couldn't own a forest the same way you owned a knife or a canoe. Land was shared, protected, respected. Then, in the early 1600s, Europeans arrived. First came explorers, then merchants, then ambition. The Dutch Republic saw opportunity in the New World, especially in fur trading. And soon, a small Dutch settlement called New Amsterdam began to rise at the southern tip of Manhattan. But the Dutch wanted control, permanent control, and that's where the legendary deal begins. According to historical records, a Dutch official named Peter Minuit made an agreement with native inhabitants in 1626. The price? Goods worth about 60 guilders. Centuries later, historians converted that value into roughly $24. And suddenly, a myth was born. Manhattan sold for $24, but the real story is far more complicated. First, $24 in the 1600s was not tiny. Depending on modern calculations, the value today could equal more than $1,000, possibly far more. Second, there's no evidence the Lenape believed they were permanently selling Manhattan forever. Many historians believe the Lenape may have interpreted the agreement as sharing land or granting temporary usage rights. To the Dutch, it was ownership. To the Lenape, it may have been diplomacy. Two completely different understandings, and that misunderstanding would change history forever. After the agreement, New Amsterdam expanded rapidly. Ships arrived constantly. Trade exploded. Money flowed into the colony. The location was perfect. Deep harbors, access to rivers, connection to the Atlantic. The island became one of the most valuable pieces of land on Earth. Then, in 1664, the British seized the colony from the Dutch. New Amsterdam became New York, and from there, the city grew into something unimaginable. Immigrants poured in from around the world. Factories rose, banks dominated, steel towers climbed higher and higher, and all of it stood in land connected to a deal whose meaning may never have truly been understood by both sides. For many Americans, the Manhattan Purchase became a symbol of clever business. But for Native communities, the story feels very different, because the purchase was part of a much larger pattern happening across North America. European powers often used treaties, trades, or agreements that Native peoples interpreted differently, and over time, indigenous communities lost more and more land. Some through pressure, some through deception, some through violence. The Lenape themselves were eventually pushed out of Manhattan entirely. The people who once walked its forests and rivers disappeared from the island that had been their home for generations. Today, millions walk through New York City without ever realizing whose land existed beneath the concrete. And maybe that's the most haunting part of the story. Not the money, not the beads, but how an entire civilization can slowly vanish from public memory. The $24 story survived because it was simple, funny, easy to repeat. It turned history into a punchline. But real history is rarely simple. The purchase of Manhattan wasn't just a business transaction. It was a collision of cultures, two worlds with completely different beliefs about ownership, nature, power, and land, and the consequences echoed across centuries. Today, Manhattan is worth trillions of dollars. Its streets influence global finance, media, fashion, and politics. Yet one question still remains: can land truly be bought if the people selling it never believed it could belong to anyone in the first place? And that brings us back to the beginning. Was Manhattan really purchased for $24? Technically, maybe. Historically, not exactly. Because the real value of Manhattan was never measured in coins or trade goods. It was measured in misunderstanding, in culture, in power, and in the future of an entire continent, the island that became the heart of New York City. The symbol of capitalism itself may have been built on one of history's greatest misunderstandings. And once you know the full story, that old joke about buying Manhattan for $24 doesn't sound very funny anymore. If you enjoyed uncovering the hidden truth behind history's biggest myths, subscribe to Histocity. Because sometimes, the stories we think we know best are the ones hiding the darkest truths. And tell me in the comments, do you think the purchase of Manhattan was a fair deal or one of history's greatest misunderstandings?